Welcome to the Digital Forester podcast, where we speak to forestry leaders and innovators who are shaping the future of forestry. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Digital Forester podcast. Today, I'm joined by Derrick Emsley. He's the CEO of Veritree and co-founder of Tentree. Derrick, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So I know in every podcast, I always say I'm super pumped to chat with the guests, but in this case, I'm super pumped. So to kick things off, just to represent, I got some of my swag
Oh,
going on
awesome.
here. And even when I was like, I need my water bottle, I better get my water bottle here. So we'll chat more about Tentree, but big fan of Tentree, what you've been doing there. But maybe to kick things off, where am I reaching you today?
So, based in Vancouver, just on the west coast here in Canada.
Awesome. Now, I know looking at your profile, not a BC native or person, someone who hailed from the prairies like my wife who's from Lumsden, Saskatchewan. So maybe
Oh,
to
yeah.
start things off, tell me about your journey when you were young at 15. You're off to a rocket ship start. Looking at my notes, planting 150,000 trees, raising over 1 million carbon credits under greenfield carbon offsetters. So maybe
Mm.
as a start, can you maybe share with our listeners, our audience, like how did you get started like at such a young age, and what inspired you to get going in that space?
Yeah. I mean, you said it. I grew up in the prairies in Saskatchewan, not really a place where there's a lot of trees to begin with. So it was a bit of a new kind of initiative that we were trying to start. But really, growing up, I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. I think Saskatchewan as a whole and the prairies as a whole are really they love to support local businesses and people that are trying to build stuff. So it was an incredible place to grow up. It was also an incredible place to really try to build something from day one. And we got what we were alluding to before, greenfield carbon offsetters. Our first business was actually, it came from an idea around the early days of kind of Kyoto Protocol and climate change conversations, like an inconvenient truth. And I was in high school at the time, and there's just all this kind of fear and concern around everything to do with climate change and what it was going to mean, given that Saskatchewan's really this like resource driven economy, a lot of farming, a lot of oil and gas, a lot of like other natural resource type products. And so, not really knowing much about the space at the time, we're, still in high school, we said, well, what takes carbon out of the air? Trees. And what do we have a lot of in Saskatchewan is farmland. And so we came up with the idea of trying to find farmland that wasn't particularly productive. So marginal farmland that maybe wasn't great for crops, but could support trees. And we ended up buying 640 acres of land, planted 150,000 trees at kind of 10 by 10 or 12 by 12 spacings. And we were able to raise a couple $1 million to go and do that project and sell carbon offsets to a number of different organizations here across Canada. So it was kind of our first, call it kick at the can from an entrepreneurship standpoint, but also our first experience stepping into the world of tree planting and forestry.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I know you mentioned the family connections with entrepreneurship. Can you maybe share more about that? Like, was it a farming background, and by default you're up at the crack of dawn with the roosters calling and doing work? Oh, the old man was like, "Get to work,
Yeah.
Derrick. We got work." Tell me more about that. I'm curious.
You know, we I think anybody that grows up in Saskatchewan comes with that sort of kind of like blue collar work ethic. I mean, even still to this day, when we talk about environmentalism and everything, we always talk about we're blue collar environmentalists. We're the kind of environmentalists that, to your point, kind of get up, we do something. We're not here to just talk about it. We're here to actually try to like get up and do it. But I was really fortunate, to your point, growing up in an entrepreneurial household. It wasn't just farming. We definitely lived and breathed and grew up within the farming space, but also, a variety of other things too. My family grew up in the resource space, or when I was growing up, my family had done some work in the resource space. everything from security to printing and a variety of other things too. So it wasn't necessarily growing up just seeing one business model type. I got really fortunate where I kind of came up with that work ethic that you talked about, but also the opportunity to see my father, really explore a variety of different business types and industries, which helped kind of, I think, us think about these opportunities differently.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And so I think when we think about that, before we dig into Veritree, which our listeners' audience, you're gonna be amazed by this. I think we have to go a little bit to the tentree brand in terms of what you're trying to do there, because from what I understand, Veritree was some technology that was being used by tentree that kind of got pulled out or spun out. But maybe
Yeah.
bring us to tentree and what you were thinking there. I know the shirt that I'm buying here unlocks 10 planted trees, the hat. So I got at least 30 trees here and probably in my wardrobe. I'm probably a couple hundred, to be honest with you. I know my friends are like, "Are you a brand ambassador?" I'm like, "I just like the stuff. It fits good, feels good. Great story." But maybe for our listeners' audience, bring us up to speed in terms of the genesis of tentree, what you were thinking, and then we'll get to Veritree.
So greenfield carbon offsetters, which we've talked about, was an incredible experience. It kind of like opened the door to us around entrepreneurship, but also tree planting. I think what we found though, within call it 3 or 4 years of it, was this was a really interesting way to fund tree planting, but it probably wasn't as scalable as we'd hoped. But the thing that really occurred to us when we were doing this project was how excited people got about the idea of tree planting. There's this sort of like emotional connection that people had to the world of reforestation and nature. And growing up in Saskatchewan, where there, like I said, there aren't that many trees when you get outside of the city, it really was this like, it was incredible to see how excited people got. And so coming out of it, we really just said we want to fund tree plant. That's what we want to do. How can we figure out a way to do it? And so we came up with the idea of building a consumer brand that funded tree planting. So sell a product, use the profits to fund tree planting, and frankly, we were pretty agnostic as to what the product was. I'm grateful that you're supportive of the 10 tree apparel, but we didn't know a thing about apparel. We knew we wanted to build a consumer brand that connected people to trees, and really even more than that, connected people to their ability to have an impact on our planet. And that became tentree. We bought some American Apparel T-shirts. We put some logos on it, and we we sold them to our friends and our family and our parents, and eventually we started selling them to people we didn't know. And today it's been an incredible ride. That business has done well over 500 million in sales since we've started it.
Amazing.
We've funded millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of reforestation all across the globe, over 110 million trees planted to date. And it is, and really it's been about learning how to build a direct consumer and a B2C brand that's really anchored within the idea of doing good for the planet can also be doing good for business.
Yeah, for sure. And that's amazing. I love it. It's like, entrepreneurs often we don't know how to do something, and for others that might be barriers. And by the sounds of it, for you and your group was just like, yeah, we'll figure it out, no problem. And look at what an amazing success story Tendry's been. But maybe if we shift gears into Veritree, the heart of this podcast, lots of technology there. There's a so I'm going to assume verification component, a tree component, but I'm also going to guess if Tentree was so focused on reforestation, and we'll talk about other types of reforestation. Uh, how did this unfold? Was this really about, hey, the technology we're looking for to move the Tentree business just wasn't what we needed? So, you know what? Given where we are, the decades we're in, let's build it ourselves. And then now fast forward today with climate tech and nature-based solutions. You guys thought, oh, there might be something here. Walk us through that thinking of how Veritree came to be.
So really, like, it probably started about 6 or 7 years ago, and it was at that point where we probably funded almost $10 million worth of tree planting globally. And we traveled all across the world. We'd seen like some incredible impact. But what we were finding was we were no longer talking in the thousands or even like millions of trees. We were talking in the tens of millions of trees that had been planted. And it was just getting increasingly challenging to verify that the work we said was happening was actually happening. And, beyond that, if you kind of open the aperture a little bit, like did the tree get planted is one part of the problem, but was it the right tree, right place, right time? Did it survive? Did it, kind of evolve into a, healthy forest? And it's the reality for us was the tree idea was in the name for tentree. So we're pretty motivated to make sure that this was a scalable impact model that we could really invest in. So we started to build technology around that basically at that nexus of did the tree get planted? How can we verify that it got planted? How can we ensure that that's audible and transparent and that there's data provenance behind it? And how can we confirm that nobody else is claiming to have funded that tree? So those were kind of like like the starting vectors that we were oriented towards from a problem set that we were trying to build a suite or a technology that allowed us to solve a 10 tree. And, like I sort of mentioned before, when you open the aperture, you realize that that's kind of like this like middle point of the problem set. And you really need to go earlier on to say, how do you make sure that the project's designed appropriately? How do you know it's implemented correctly? How are you collecting that data? And then later stage, how do you ensure that the tree survived, do the correct monitoring verification, all these different things. And so really we were building these tools to solve 10 trees problem, which is we're funding a bunch of tree planting every year, global reforestation all across Africa, Asia, South America, Canada, US, and beyond. And we needed to know if it was actually happening. And the funny thing for us was we never really intended for it to be its own business. We thought like this is a really like kind of not maybe necessarily niche, but a very focused use case, and it was really building it for ourselves. But we started getting approached by other organizations that were funding reforestation, and they said, can we use your technology? We want to fund restoration too, or we already are, and we're facing the exact same problems. And so in 2022, we spun it out as its own business. And today we're helping hundreds of businesses, well, thousands of businesses actually, to audit and implement high quality restoration work.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. And so thinking of that, you're going into this technology space. And for our listeners and viewers, I encourage you to go to the Veritree website and take a look at what they're doing because you're touching things like Internet of Things, you're touching things like drones, satellite base, there's even a little section which I love, the geospatial technology. So as a GIS guy from the
Yeah.
early days, I was like, oh, it's highlighting there's lidar data you're talking about, right? And so there's a lot of complex geospatial and IT, IoT, advanced technologies at play. How did you guys think about that? Like, did you have someone like another co-founder, another person in Tentree that was just maybe the nerd? And I say nerd in a loving way. I know I say that live
Yeah.
on calls and people are like, oh, that's so demeaning. I'm like, I'm a nerd and I'm proud to be a nerd. But where did that knowledge come from? Or is that just another one of those, hey, welcome to Entrepreneurship 101? It's like, we don't know and we're okay not knowing and we'll figure it out. But tell me more about that.
I think the answer is both. The beauty of entrepreneurship, and I think this has been part of our secret to success, and I think in most cases, most entrepreneurs' secret to success is not knowing what you don't know, but being really engaged in learning and asking questions. We started a apparel business without knowing a single thing about apparel. Not one of our co-founders had any experience in building product, making apparel, fashion of any sort. But we started from the sort of foundation or the belief set that people wanted to buy product that represented their values and would support product that gave back to the planet. And then we kind of built out around that. The same thing happened with Veritree. I think like we were very fortunate that one of my co-founders, Steven, he was from day one at Tentree everything to do with technology for the business. He'd done everything from, the world of performance marketing and Google Suite and AWS and server backend to our Shopify and e-commerce website to all of our sort of infrastructure on the back. So he had a really sort of wide set of understanding around technology and how these different sort of products interplay with each other. But again, it was similar to Tentree where we were just really trying to solve this problem. And it was kind of peeling back layers of the onion. And every time it was well, what's the most, you know, frankly, like the fastest way to solve this problem? And often there was a lot of creative solutions rather than just, using what had maybe necessarily been there before other organizations had used. And it allowed us to really just, I think, look at the problem in a bit more of a creative way. But all to say, we were incredibly fortunate that we had a co-founder, both from the Tentree and the veritree side, that had this sort of baseline understanding and just a creativity around his problem solving approach.
Right, right. So they had a sense of what the art of the possible is, and I often joke, dangerous enough with some
Yeah,
technology skills to bring a MVP or a prototype to life. No, very, very cool. And so, thinking of the technology side, can you walk us through? I guess some of our listeners, I know you. Maybe I often like to role play like as a prospective customer, and for context, you roll with the Samsungs, and I think recently the Manulifes, like these large organizations, and I'm sure scale probably doesn't matter. You can cater to like SMB or other sizes of
yeah,
companies. But as a company, Kevin Lim comes in and says, Derrick, love what you're doing. I want to invest in I don't know, 100,000 acre or 100,000 hectare reforestation project. We design the project, things get planted, and then I say, how do I know? How do I keep track of what's going on? Walk me through some of the technology that you guys are using, because I believe there's some field data collection. There's even cameras there. There's dashboards
yeah.
that pull it together. Super cool. But maybe walk me through what, as a customer, I might get that I can then kind of tout to my colleagues.
So I think the starting point is really like if you look at the our market, we kind of view it in like very simplistic terms as organizations that want to invest in nature. And we are relatively as Veritree agnostic as to why they are choosing to do that. Is it for, carbon? Is it and climate? Is it for ESG, some like, insetting or a variety of other things? Is it for CSR or philanthropic initiatives? Like there's a variety, or is it for just asset return, something like that? We we're pretty agnostic as to the reason, but there's so the aperture of why they're choosing to invest is pretty broad. But we work with those organizations on one side of our platform, and then on the other side of the platform we work with the groups that are actually doing the work. So really Veritree, the technology in a lot of cases acts as this sort of connective tissue between the two of them. And so if I think about, you've got the reforestation on one end of the spectrum and you've got the funder on the other end. Veritree and the software, the workflow within it really operates within between those two. And so the way to think about our software is it's really intended to walk through the life cycle of a restoration project and help measure and elevate the impacts that are taking place, both from an input standpoint. So, the input being the tree, and the outcome. So the outcome potentially being the biodiversity, the carbon, the, even socioeconomic impact, and really helping connect the dots of those two things. And then helping the funder at the end really be able to capture that data in a way that they can market it, they can integrate it into their own reporting, they can, celebrate it in some way. So the technology itself is really like I said before, we kind of started from this point of did the tree get planted, which was really a desktop interface with a ground based application to collect data against what was happening in the field. That's where it kind of started. And then it went earlier stage into that sort of world of project design and opportunity assessment, which is really a lot of geospatial assessment. We built some of our own proprietary and custom models to and evaluate different land area and really understand what the reforestation potential is, but also really geospatial analysis to understand, what should be planted there, what could be the opportunity, the density, the historic land cover, all those sorts of things that, you'd be very familiar with coming from the geospatial space. And really taking all that and turning it into a project plan that can then be implemented through our ground-based application to collect the data and the evidence to support those inputs that I mentioned. So the inputs in some cases are tree planting, but it could be a variety of things. It could be trenching or hydrology that's necessary to support a mangrove project. It could actually be transportation of seedlings and different procurement things, but like really managing those inputs, and then also connecting to the outcomes, which you alluded to it, but often gets you into that monitoring, that sort of subsequent monitoring and verification space, which is those inputs can run through our verification workflow that our software has built in to ensure that if say Samsung, as a for instance, wants to have their own specific verification workflow, or they want it to attach to a third party workflow or verification. So they want it to attach to XYZ standard. That can be sort of toggled within our system to allow us to walk those inputs to make sure that they're audited against certain standards. And then we can deploy field sensors, everything from dendrometers to sort of weather monitors to your point, wildlife cameras or traps, acoustic monitors. And then our system can either use the sort of world of models that are available, or we have a number of our own proprietary sort of computer vision models or acoustic monitor models to identify what species are being heard, the occurrence, the sort of like change over time, and help kind of take all this data to help you generate what we kind of think of as a pulse of the forest. So really understanding, how's it operating? Is it healthy? Are the inputs trending in the right direction? And really act as your sort of single source of truth for this restoration project. And then, you know, long-winded answer, but then at the very end of it, all of that data as the reforestation organization is housed in a way that they can access and, kind of, query however they need to, and really in like a nice interface. But in some cases, just as important, but particularly for the funders, all that data gets showcased in a really interactive dashboard where they can really celebrate the impact that they've funded.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. No, that's great for providing context, like a lot of technology there. And I think looking at doing, while I was doing my research, what I found fascinating was that you're even putting this on the blockchain. So what's the thinking there? Is this ledger for transparency and ensuring that things are not immutable, or is maybe downstream a play? Derek's thinking Web3, a crypto component where we can transact on a smart contract with some of these players that, to your point, are globally and probably in different countries with different levels of readiness for financial institutions. Maybe for our listeners, share more about the blockchain thinking there. Where did that come from? Was that just a natural progression in Veritree's thinking, or is that maybe more intentional in terms of some of the technology folks within the company?
It's for us, it wasn't intentional from the beginning because the way that we viewed the world of reforestation and restoration work, particularly, like in a lot of cases, this world is different from core forestry in the sense that like core forestry is a very hard industry in the sense that like you have a physical product, wood, that you eventually realize, and so all your inputs going into it, and then at the end of it you got your logs and the return on your investment. In restoration work, and particularly like the world of environmental philanthropy, and that it's a very soft, call it like charismatic kind of outcome that you're chasing. And you could say the same thing about carbon or a variety of these other things. And the reality of that is, as the funder of it, you're really buying a digital product because 99.9% of the time, that customer is either never going to visit the project, they're never going to, touch the carbon that their trees sequestered or the biodiversity that their forest improved. And so when that's the case, like trust is the foundation of that product. And and so veritree itself and our technology really is this sort of system of record and truth for that. But we looked at it as in the future there's going to be a world where, these products, these digital products particularly, really are going to need a increasing level of kind of verification and standardization and things like smart contracts that you alluded to. And so while I would say in general, the world of sort of blockchain and crypto has gone through a very like meandering path, I would say it to us still the sort of foundational technology behind it and this sort of like immutable distributed ledger type approach really has a lot of potential benefits to that kind of digital product that like trust and verification, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure, very cool. And I guess maybe a question I've in preparation for chatting with you, there's a question I was stuck on, and I know I've chatted with other folks that are in this space and maybe slightly adjacent a little bit, maybe purely focused on just force in general and the verification side with different standards and different protocols for verification, and then that creating trip ups where what was verified wasn't really quite truth, and then that greenwashing jargons that's getting invoking and whatnot. Is that an issue for what Veritree does with that's focused on reforestation? Do those standards come in and create challenges for you, or have you largely tackled that maybe differently by saying, hey, because we're so open and transparent, we can comply with pretty much whatever it is you choose because our data is available to you. We've got a blockchain to track the transactions. Is that, we hear about the UN Red program, satellite
Yeah.
imagery and stuff, and everyone does it differently than whatnot. What can you share on that? Is that really still an issue in the circles that you're working with, or is that largely being, or maybe amplified more than it really deserves?
No, it is a problem in the nature-based space, particularly in sort of the world of climate and, the biodiversity and all these other things. I think any of these markets that are new and evolving go through this where there's like the sort of the boom and the optimism and then the comeback to earth. And we talk about it internally, we call it the nature-based hype cycle that's kind of happened here over the last kind of 5 years. And climate went on the exact same thing. It was okay, climate is like we have to do something about it yesterday, and then all this capital gets built up, and then it kind of that entire market and particularly the world of funding around it really has crashed, and there's still some belief and optimism, but like the funding has come down by an order of magnitude. And so I think what you've seen, particularly in the standard space, is okay, there was a lot of optimism and a lot of sort of the cowboy kind of mentality at the beginning of just do things. And then everyone said, whoa, 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 slow down. And then we tried to pile a million standards into it and do it by calling out all the things that went wrong. And so this is a pretty normal to me sort of market cycle that's taken place. I really believe what's interesting about it right now, the nature-based, the climate space, is like this is the moment where durable and real companies that actually create value start to get built. And there's hundreds of standards. A lot of them won't exist in 5 years. There's hundreds of different sort of like solutions and approaches to these, and a lot of them won't exist in a number of years. What's interesting, and I think what's helped us both weather and kind of thrive through some of that kind of like spike and then crash, has been that at its core One is that we were not laser focused on the markets that had these, call it climate or carbon standards associated with them. So if all we did was red or all we did was XYZ carbon standard, we would be in a really challenging spot right now because there would have been a lot of optimism and then nobody would have any money. And we couldn't have funded this work. On the flip side, what we've kind of done, which I think is different, is that we have said our belief fundamentally is verifiable and auditable and transparent restoration. And we're trying to build the system and the solution to solve that and gather all the data necessary to be sort of that, call it like data lake, that sort of single source of truth or repository for a restoration project. And whether it be the sensor data for biodiversity or whether the input data on tree planting, the outcome data on carbon, the design data upstream or the ongoing subsequent lidar or drone imagery, whatever have you, all that in a single place where as these standards continue to sort of shift with the market sentiment and evolve, a restoration project still fundamentally needs to be transparent, auditable, and deliver real outcomes. And our system is designed to help with that and give you the platform to kind of manage around the shifting winds, have you, of like where these kind of external standards go.
For sure, for sure. Very neat, very neat. And I guess maybe if we shift gears to kind of connect some of this, I guess the next question is kind of a fun one, I think. Given all of this, are there two projects you can share with me? One, maybe the one you're the most proud of, if that's such a thing. This is my baby, and it flourished flawlessly, perfect to plan. And then maybe is there a project you can share that surprised you? And sometimes in life there's surprises that come from left field. What are two projects you'd share with our listeners and viewers in terms of Veritree's mission to date that just stick out to you?
For I would say I think one of the projects that I've been, and it's not necessarily one particular project, but it's kind of a collection of projects that we've been able to really invest and scale around, was the work that we started probably 4 years ago now with the Kenyan Forest Service and a number of different sort of organizations, one out of Kenya, where we we found an organization there early on when we were starting Veritree that was relatively new, and it was the same timing as we were relatively new with Veritree. And we approached them and said, listen, like, this is our vision of Veritree. We want to build this software. You have, the opportunity to really like, continue to scale restoration work in Kenya, both coastal like mangrove, but also some terrestrial too. And and we want to work together. We want to almost like kind of go grow together and learn from you, learn from us, and kind of build this in tandem. And that project today, my understanding is that that organization in partnership with us is currently the largest reforestation project and organization in all of Kenya. And the Forest Service and a lot of the organizations there basically have kind of like looked at the reporting that they're able to provide back from a governmental level as some of the gold standard of what they've seen. And so to me, that's been an incredible sort of like start from almost zero, but continue to scale together and learn and screw up, you know, almost as many times as you get it right along the way. But that's been such an incredible, example of kind of partnership between two organizations from day one. That's really built around the idea of like, hey, we both believe in the same thing, which is the verification, the auditing, and the transparency. And then the second one, I would say, really is more of the work that we're doing here in Canada, where we've been able to partner with, some really incredible organizations, and you alluded to it earlier, and I think it was maybe announced earlier today, but Manulife's a great example of an organization that does reforestation and is a massive landowner, forestry holder, and they've helped us partner on deploying what we kind of call internally our GROOT system, which is our, ground-based real-time observation of trees, which, from day one started as like a small box, then it became a Yeti cooler with batteries and like, like Starlinks to, small sensors that are sort of linked across this sensor net. And, and then the exciting thing about that was they've kind of taken a number of these steps with us here in Canada at these projects, and eventually come to us and said, we like what that we're doing, we like where this is going, we actually want you to not necessarily, we have these projects we're already working on, we want you to pick that up and take it to these other projects in Southeast Asia and otherwise. So I think those
Nice.
are two examples of like some really cool sort of growth where they basically said, we need the reporting and the verification and the real-time monitoring that you're able to provide from this, you know, janky V1 Groot to where it's kind of evolved to where we're kind of in the third or fourth iteration of it, where it's the form factor's kind of shrunk down. It's a lot more dynamic. And they said, we want you to scale it at our other projects.
So by default, if we have the I am Groot from what Guardians of the Galaxy,
Exactly.
should we have Guardians of the Earth in terms of veritree and Groot 2.0? That's super cool. And thinking of that, it made me kind of chuckle as you're telling that story, because I wonder, and I'm guessing you travel a lot, and given these projects like Kenya, Canada, I'm sure there's tons of them all over the world. Do you still have the travel bug, the itch in you, or are you kind of at the point where it's like, I'm gonna let the youngins or other people who aspire to be in a business lounge or aspire to whatever that thing is that we used to aspire to as people who didn't travel? I'm just curious, are you still actively like roaming around the world, backpacking, hiking, doing this stuff? Or what stage of life are you, or what are your views on that point, I guess?
Well, I've got my firstborn on the way here, so I'm sure if you'd asked
Congratulations.
me if you asked me this in a year, I'm sure the answer will be quite different. I definitely still put in some serious miles on the with it on the flights with the flight programs. I would say that while definitely the kind of excitement and luster of travel has worn off on me, or has kind of like worn itself away, what when I am in the countries seeing these projects in person in real time, it every time I'm like grateful and struck by just how impactful these projects are. I think, here in Canada, we have this like forestry industry, and I feel like you kind of grow up with an understanding of forestry, like how many Canadians go and plant trees in northern Canada, and it's like this kind of dirtbag, hard work, like really tough lifestyle, and it's almost this like rite of passage in a lot of
Yep.
cases, and so I think our view of forestry in Canada is very specific to Canada. But what's been incredible for us is going to a place like Kenya, where we've been able to support the, you know, like tens of thousands of hectares of reforestation of reforested mangrove lands and forest adjusted communities to help them get out of, cutting down the mangroves for charcoal or shelter or firewood and into restoring them and, providing all these sorts this additional infrastructure around it and seeing the impact of that, just like in other countries like Senegal or India, where we've done some really large scale agroforestry work and seeing the implementation of the technology, not just in sort of 10,000 contiguous hectares, but in these like tiny little 1 acre parcels that are scattered across several like kind of county type areas, and just being able to see all the data come in and roll that up. But really, like, as much as I hate to sit in another, plane or lounge, it's like when you're in the field and you're seeing it firsthand, like there's nothing better and there's nothing that kind of gives you that sort of kick in the ass to be like, okay, like this is worth doing.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you. I always tell some folks you almost need to leave Canada to see the rest of the world, see humanity, realize it's other humans there. But at the same time, coming back, appreciating what Canada is. I always find when I come back, even though it's the grumpy Air Canada steward or stewardess, or just some Canadiana about them that you're just like, yeah, I'm back home. And yeah, so sometimes doing that's great. I think we'd be remiss by not talking about other types of reforestation. I know I've been very focused on trees, this being the Digital Forester podcast, but tell me about some of the other reforestation initiatives. Because I know when I did my research, I'm like, this is super cool. You got some kelp, and I think there's a
Yeah.
statistic that 1% grows within X period. Like, very fascinating. But maybe share more about the other types of reforestation initiatives that you're involved with beyond trees.
Yeah, well, I mean, we kind of the way we think about it in our organization is trees are almost this sort of like symbolic anchor point that anybody can attach to, but the actual like reforestation methodologies, there's a ton of different examples. And so, we're not just we have internally segmented our five kind of pillars of impact with mangroves. We do a lot of work with mangroves, and we built some really, in sophisticated proprietary models around mangroves, which is a really challenging ecosystem to work in, particularly from a geospatial perspective and a geospatial measurement standpoint. Same thing goes with agroforestry. That's been, one of those sorts of, areas where it's maybe not such a focused impact on say carbon, but the socioeconomic impact and being able to measure that is really incredible. We do post wildfire, and so that's you see a lot of that here in Canada. We've also done some of that in areas like Australia, and we then have kind of like a catch-all, which we kind of call terrestrial planting. But the fifth one, and you alluded to it, is we think about it as seaforestation, and so really the core focus of that is the kelp work that we're doing. We have a large amount of infrastructure here on the west coast, just off the kind of sunshine coast here by Vancouver, where we're doing some pretty large scale like kelp reforestation work. And a lot of that is there is some sequestration benefits and opportunities, but the real incredible piece is the biodiversity impact. You'll go down and you'll see the sort of eggs that are all across the leaves of the kelp from spawning fish. We found a endangered starfish that was living within the kelp reforestation site that we were doing, which is a critical sort of predator of urchins, which have kind of like proliferated and taken over because a lot of the natural predators have died off for them. And then as well with kelp, kind of very early, more like niche piece that we've kind of been testing and sort of experiencing. We've had a couple of our customers ask us to play into this is coral reforestation, and so that's a really cool one. It's very early and new for us, and we're still kind of building the call it monitoring and verification toolkit within our system because it is very different, but we kind of view it as another one of those trees that kind of basket into this seaforestation category.
Very cool, very cool. Well, hey, if you don't want to sit in the lounge or the airplane, I'll be happy to take the trip to the Great Barrier Reef or the Maldives for you
Yeah,
for that
right.
project, right? So very cool. So another question I have to ask is AI is prevalent everywhere and everyone's talking about it, and to some extent, different camps might say that hype cycle you talked about earlier in the pod, there's a bit of that going on, and there'll be some destruction in startups, but that's kind of the life cycle, I guess, of that world of startups and entrepreneurship. But is AI something that really resonates with Veritree in terms of its mission and where it's going, or is it just another piece of technology that you're going to layer in to ensure that you have the auditability, the transparency, and the verification in the platform?
To us, AI is a pretty significant paradigm shift. And I think it comes in two ways. One is how we build our business, and then the other is how we create value for the users of our platform. So from the perspective of how we build, I think what we are seeing is, that while there's only so far you can, take Chat GPT and, to have you write this and that, there is the evolution from a coding perspective is kind of continuing to advance quite rapidly. And so what we're also thinking in a lot more interesting ways about how can our software evolve from not just like an AI enabled perspective, but what would it look like if it was more of an AI native type software and we're really looking at this from an agentic standpoint and saying, what does an integrated agentic layer look like within our software? And so we're building some really exciting tools right now on that front that we're going to be piloting with a number of our different partners over the course of the next year here. But that's more about sort of how we're building the software. So I think what it's allowing us to do is really like scale our code base, scale our software, and deliver new features and functionalities, particularly within this sort of like agentic space, without necessarily adding a bunch of, like kind of linear headcount. I think if you'd asked me kind of if you could copy and paste me the 2 years ago, I would have said to do the things we're going to do this year, we would need 40 more engineers. And we would basically have had to double our software and product and engineering team. And I think we're going to do it. We're not going to add we're not going to have to add any new additional headcount. So that's more internal. But then the other side of it, where I think there's a really interesting and massive opportunity, is on how we create value for both sides of the kind of the value chain within our system. There's the suppliers or the reforestation organizations. And like I alluded to before, like the veritree system itself really is meant to act as this single source of truth, this like data repository where from, project beginning to project end, it can house all the data. AI is really allowing us to think more creatively and create a better way to view insights from that data and use all the data to drive more insights, and then kind of reinforced learning on the earlier stage of better project design and opportunity assessment and better verification and faster verification within our system. So there's some really interesting things to streamline workflows for the groups on the ground. And then for the funders of these projects, it's also helping us think, and this is still relatively early, but how they can, build within their sort of platform and visual to say, what data do they need to know? How can we get more relevant information directly to them about the work that's happening in the field and how that is sort of leaning against what they were looking for, what we know they value, and things like that.
Very cool. Very cool. And I've got two more questions as we look to gradually wind down here. And it's interesting because I think it brings us full circle. I know when we were chatting at the start, the entrepreneurship journey, there's a hint of scalability in there in terms of all the ventures you've been involved with, and you've successfully scaled. And I guess thinking of veritree, thinking of tentree, we've got a goal of a billion trees planted, and then at the same time, kind of reading you, it's like, yeah, we'll hit billion, we'll hit 2 billion. Like that's just a number, an arbitrary number. But when we think about where you are today, and you alluded to, I think 110 million trees planted today. I think on the veritree, there's about 55 million trees verified. Moving in that trajectory, what do you see as some of your challenges or hurdles? And then where do you even see is there additional upside, I guess, thinking of that journey going forward? What thoughts would you share about that in terms of how we're going to get to that super cool goal that you got?
Yeah, there's something about like a number that always helps anchor sort of where we're headed for the team and for, external messaging. And for us, like a billion trees, it's funny, that was a goal we set out for tentree back in like 2017. And I remember at that time, a next door neighbor of us was a clothing company that basically came out and announced their goal was a billion in sales in a year, and ours was a billion trees. We're like, okay, we're very different companies. I think for us, the thing that we've though really recognized, particularly is through this evolution of Bear Tree, is the tree as much as it's an incredible anchor point for that goal, the tree is the input. And the idea of a billion trees planted is a massive oversimplification of what we're really trying to do. We're trying to, create forests. We're trying to plant trees that survive, that lead to like incredible outcomes, both from a community, a planet, a biodiversity perspective. So I think what's interesting for us, and as we look ahead, like the challenge that we're facing and will continue to face is, if it took us 11 years to plant 100 million trees or to fund 100 million trees with tentree. And in a lot of cases, if I look back, like we funded 100 million plus. How many of them actually got planted appropriately? How many of them survived? It's really challenging for me to say with confidence that all that work was done in a really high quality, high integrity way. I think today, we're layering in this level of auditability and transparency and verification where we're trying to put more of our money where our mouth is and saying, like, if we're going to do this, we want to do it right. And that means every day, whether it's 100 million trees this year or 200 million trees next year, it's not just about the trees planted that year. It's about the trees that we planted throughout the lifetime of this business, and really making sure that we're able to, support, because like things happen too. This is nature. It's not like it's going to be perfect, but really building the sort of like reporting and management toolkit around that is something that really like we continue to think a lot about.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. So the final question I have for you, Derrick, is I know, and we'll come full circle to that entrepreneurship side, and it's one that a lot of our listeners, viewers, say they love or they tell me. But looking at your journey, and an amazing journey, and congratulations on it, by the way. That as someone in that seat, I can relate and appreciate what you've accomplished, maybe more than others can. So hats off to you. Very, very cool. If you look back, thinking of maybe some of our younger digital foresters listeners, which there's tons of them, and eyes wide, wanting to change the world, make impact, influence, and whatnot. And sometimes real life crushes some of those dreams or those aspirations, and I believe it's for us, some of us, to kind of keep reinvigorating, re-energizing them, making sure that flame doesn't go out, that they can change the world. Thinking of your journey to date, and not that you're like, for our listeners, like Derek's not an old gray-haired dude. He's expecting his first kid. He's a young guy, right? But looking back, like, what is there a couple pro tips of advice that you would share with a younger Derek or someone else that's listening and thinking this is super cool? I want to be like Derek and Team Tentree, Team Veritree. I want to do something. Are there any pro tips that in your journey so far you're just like, these are game changers? Wish I knew then and I can share now. Are there any that you can think of right now?
I would say the things that have worked for us since the beginning is one, having a lot of conviction from a sort of foundational perspective, so of like what you're building. So, and to me, I think where that comes from is a really clear understanding of what the problem is. And I think too many people, too many founders, too many early sort of people in their career, they get obsessed with the solution rather than the problem. And whether it be for tentree, like we were not obsessed with building an apparel business. We were obsessed with building a consumer brand that planted trees, because we thought that there was this like lack of connection between people and nature, and we knew people wanted to have an impact. With veritree, our focus has been on the problem, that this sort of like very focused problem around the trees being planted and the ownership, and that has then kind of continued to evolve and open the aperture on it. But had we been so focused on, say, the solution being it's carbon, like there is a graveyard right now of the last 10 years of some companies that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars that won't exist or don't exist anymore. And it's because they got obsessed with the solution and not the problem. And so to me, the thing that has really worked for us as we've built our businesses is become obsessed with the problem, really like understand it in an intimate sort of like, you need to go to bed thinking about it at night, wake up thinking about it at night, and really get obsessed with that and continue to build incrementally around it. And I think for us that has been probably the most valuable approach. So like my suggestion would be for anybody out there, one is like just get involved in the space. So learn about it, because you don't know what the problems are if you haven't actually done it. If you haven't been out in at a tree planting camp, if you haven't been in a forestry type space, you don't know what the problems are. But then once you understand the problems, that's when you can really get obsessed with solving them.
Amazing, amazing. Well, pearls of wisdom there. So, in closing, I just wanted to thank you for agreeing to do this. I know you're a super busy guy, and truthfully, it's been a privilege for me to chat with you. I know as a brand ambassador at Tentree, it's like I never thought, oh, I'll actually talk with the CEO one of these days, and I'll expect my promo code to come in by email.
It's on
Then
its way.
I'm gonna send it to the Veritree website and punch it there and see what happens there. But in all seriousness, thanks so much for your time. I know you're a busy guy. For those who want to maybe follow up and reach out with you and have follow up conversations, is there a best way to get a hold of you? Is it LinkedIn, social, email, website? How can folks get a hold of Derrick Emsley if they want to learn more about what Veritree does and maybe launch a project of their own?
Yeah, best way is over LinkedIn. That tends to be the best way to reach me. I'm not a huge social media user outside of that, so definitely feel free to reach out. And yeah, thanks again for having me, Kevin. It's been
Yeah,
great to chat.
awesome, great stuff. Well, thanks very much, and we'll keep in touch.